All right, here we are again. I'm gonna go ahead and pop into episode 7 of 10 minutes reading the Anarchist Handbook organized by Michael Malice. We're in chapter 3, Max Stirner, From the Ego and His Own, 1844. We're starting tonight on page 22, episode 7. So here we go. But they are bound to have their playground, for they are children, you know, and cannot be so staid as old folks. Boys will be boys. Only for this playground, only for a few hours of jolly running about they bargain. They ask only that the state should not, like a splenetic papa, be too cross. It should permit some processions of the ass and plays of fools, as the church allowed them in the Middle Ages. But the times when it could grant this without danger are past. Children that now once come into the open and live through an hour without the rod of discipline are no longer willing to go into the cell. For the open is now no longer a supplement to the cell, no longer a refreshing recreation, but its opposite, and out. In short, the state, again, in this case capitalized, must either no longer put up with anything or put up with everything and perish. It must be either sensitive through and through, or, like a dead man, insensitive. Tolerance is done with. If the state but gives a finger, they take the whole hand at once. There can be no more jesting, and all jest, such as fun, wit, humor, becomes bitter earnest. The clamor of the liberals for freedom of the press runs counter to their own principles, their proper will. They will what they do not will. They wish they would like. Hence it is too that they fall away so easily when once so-called freedom of the press appears. Then they would like censorship, quite naturally. The state is sacred even to them, likewise morals. They behave toward it only as ill-bred brats, as tricky children who seek to utilize the weakness of their parents. Papa State is to permit them to say many things that do not please him, but Papa has the right, by a stern look, to blue pencil their impertinent gabble. If they recognize in him their Papa, they must in his presence put up with the censorship of speech, like every child. If you let yourself be made out in the right by another, you must no less let yourself be made out in the wrong by him. If justification and reward come to you from him, expect also his arraignment and punishment. Alongside right goes wrong. Alongside legality, crime. What are you? You are a criminal. The criminal is in the utmost degree the state's own crime, says Bettina. One may let this sentiment pass, even if Bettina herself does not understand it exactly so. For in the state, the unbridled I, as I belong to myself alone, cannot come to my fulfillment and realization. Every ego is from birth a criminal to begin with against the people, the state. Hence, it is that it does really keep watch over all. It sees in each one an egoist, and it is afraid of the egoist. It presumes the worst about each one, and takes care, police care, that no harm happens to the state. No quid res publica detrimenti capiat. The unbridled ego, and this we originally are, and in our secret inward parts we remain so always, is the never-ceasing criminal in the state. The man whom his boldness, his will, his inconsiderateness and fearlessness lead is surrounded with spies by the state, by the people. I say by the people. The people, parentheses, think it's something wonderful, you good-hearted folks, what you have in the people. The people is full of police sentiments through and through. Only he who renounces his ego, who practices self-renunciation, is acceptable to the people. In the book cited, Bettina is throughout good-natured enough to regard the state as only sick and to hope for its recovery, a recovery which she would bring about through the demagogues. But it is not sick. Rather is it in its full strength, when it pulls from it the demagogues who want to acquire something for the individuals, for, quote, all. In its believers, it is provided with the best demagogues, leaders of the people. According to Bettina, the state is to develop mankind's germ of freedom, otherwise it is a raven mother and caring for raven fodder. That was a quote, I apologize. I'm not calling them all out, nor all the parentheses. This essay has a lot of both, and the language is challenging, especially if you're reading it cold, so I apologize for some of that. According to Bettina, the state is to, quote, develop mankind's germ of freedom. Otherwise, it is a raven mother and caring for raven fodder, end quote. It cannot do otherwise, for in its very caring for, quote, mankind, parentheses, which besides would have to be the, quote, humane or, quote, free state to begin with, the, quote, individual is raven fodder for it. How rightly speaks the burgomaster, on the other hand, quote, what? The state has no other duty than to be merely the attendant of incurable invalids? That isn't to the point. From of old the healthy state has relieved itself of the diseased matter, and not mixed itself with it. It does not need to be so economical with its juices. Cut off the robber branches without hesitation, that the others may bloom. Do not shiver at the state's harshness, its morality, its policy and religion. Point it to that. Accuse it of no want of feeling. Its sympathy revolts against this, but its experience finds safety only in this severity. There are diseases in which only drastic remedies will help. The physician who recognizes the disease as such, but timidly turns to palliatives, will never remove the disease, but may well cause the patient to succumb after a shorter or longer sickness. Frau Rath's question, quote, if you apply death as a drastic remedy, how is the cure to be wrought then? Isn't to the point. Why, the state does not apply death against itself, but against an offensive member. It tears out an eye that offends it, etc. Quote, for the invalid state, the only way of salvation is to make man flourish in it. If one here, like Bettina, understand by man the concept, quote, man, she is right. The, quote, invalid state will recover by the flourishing of man. For the more infatuated the individuals are with man, the better it serves the state's turn. But if one referred it to the individuals to, quote, all, parentheses, and the authoress half does this too, because about man she is still involved in vagueness, end parentheses, then it would sound somewhat like the following. For an invalid band of robbers, the only way of salvation is to make the loyal citizen nourish in it. Why, thereby the band of robbers would simply go to ruin as a band of robbers. And because it perceives this, it prefers to shoot everyone who has a leaning toward becoming a, quote, steady man. In this book, Bettina is a patriot, or what is little more, a philanthropist, a worker for human happiness. She is discontented with the existing order in quite the same way as is the title ghost of her book, along with all who would like to bring back the good old faith and what goes with it. Only she thinks contrariwise that the politicians, placeholders, and diplomats ruin the state, while those lay it at the door of the malevolent, the, quote, seducers of the people. What is the ordinary criminal but one who has committed the fatal mistake of endeavoring after what is the people's instead of seeking for what is his? He has sought despicable alien goods, has done what believers do who seek after what is God's. What does the priest who admonishes the criminal do? He sets before him the great wrong of having desecrated by his act what was hallowed by the state, its property, parentheses, in which, of course, must be included even the life of those who belong to the state. Instead of this, he might rather hold up to him the fact that he has befouled himself in not despising the alien thing, but thinking it worth stealing, he could if he were not a person. Talk with a so-called criminal as with an egoist, and he will be ashamed. Not that he transgressed against your laws and goods, but that he considered your laws worth evading, your goods worth desiring. He will be ashamed that he did not despise you and yours together, that he was too little an egoist. But you cannot talk egoistically with him, for you are not so great as a criminal. You commit no crime. You do not know that an ego who is his own cannot desist from being a criminal. That crime is his life. And yet you should know it, since you believe that, quote, we are all miserable sinners. But you think surreptitiously to get beyond sin. You do not comprehend, for you are devil-fearing. That guilt is the value of a man. Oh, if you were guilty, by now you are, quote, righteous. Well, just put everything nicely to right for your master. So, went a little bit long, but that's okay. To the end of page 25. Again, episode 7. The Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice. And I will say it again, you should be buying physical copies of this book because it's much harder to silence somebody reading around the campfire or around the table and discussing it. So digital is great, it's fantastic, no problem with it, but buy physical books, especially if they're critical.